Hello, my friends, and welcome back to The Gently Used Human. On today's episode, I have the privilege of sitting down with my dear friend and one of the most inspiring minds in trauma and holistic health, Dr. Gabor Maté. Gabor's groundbreaking insights have reshaped how we understand addiction, mental health, and chronic illness. His work provides profound innovations to uncover the ways we have disconnected from ourselves and the profound effects that has on our health, well-being, and the systems that we live in. In this conversation, we'll explore the ways we hide behind identities we've constructed for survival and how those compensations often trap us in cycles of pain and hurt. Together, we'll peel back the layers of who we think we are, illuminate the courage it takes to rediscover the truth of who we have always been, and reflect on how we unlock our capacity for healing and wholeness. This episode is a journey into the heart of what it means to be human, and I can't wait to share it with you. Gabor, welcome to The Gently Used Human. I adore you. And speaking of achievements, you're getting a big award today. What is that award?
So Simon Fraser University here in Vancouver, Burnaby, has an annual controversy in academia award, and this year they decided to grant it to me. Like I was telling you, the only controversial thing about it, as far as I'm concerned, is how come I didn't get it years ago, you know?
I would agree. I'm disappointed in them for waiting this long.
Yeah, I'll give them what for tonight at the ceremony.
You know, what's funny is that a few of my questions, when I was writing them out in preparation, started with, your work is really controversial, or, this, I kept using the word controversial. So it must have been something, an attunement with you in this big award today.
Well, you know what? I wish the work was more controversial than it is, in the sense that I wish there was a genuine debate and controversy. The issues that I talk about, the traumatic basis of addictions and mental health issues, the childhood programming that creates a template for autoimmune disease, the mind-body unity, the non-genetic causations of conditions like ADHD. I wish there was more controversy around it. The problem is there's mostly like a silence around it. And like in the medical world, there just isn't enough conversation around these topics. It's more like there's a kind of a stolid, almost non-awareness that these are even issues. So I wish there was more controversy in that sense,
Yeah, I mean, I get that in terms of the controversy in the medical world, but you have pierced through into the mainstream, and I mean, you go viral quickly, buddy.
Yeah.
And I think that there's something to say that people feel attuned with you more than they feel attuned with the common and familiar ways in which the medical system is not supporting them, not helping them heal. So I think, yes, the controversial award goes to the medical side, but actually not the mainstream.
Yeah. Well, first of all, you say I go viral quickly. I don't know if at age 80 I can say it quickly, like I was. As far as I'm concerned, I'm still a promising young man at age 80, and it took a long, but you know what? As you know, it's not just me. There's been a whole wave, and I've been running the crest along with yourself, and before you were old enough to come along, people like Bessel and, Peter Levine, the people that we both love and work with. There's kind of a wave has been cresting around this broader awareness in the public mind now for a while.
Yeah.
A wave that has left behind the mainstream medical thinking, and people resonate with it because it's their lives. So when you talk about this stuff, people recognize themselves.
Yeah. I remember as a kid, speaking of recognizing myself, I know you were diagnosed with ADHD later in adulthood, in your 40s or 50s?
Early 50s, actually.
Early 50s. And I must have been 6 or 7 when I got, and it was a slew of diagnosis of learning disabilities. And I was put on medication, and I remember going and saying to my parents, this isn't me. Like, I'm not going to take the medication. It's altering who I am. And
Yes.
there was a lot of pushback I did. And I just remember saying to them, my sister also got a diagnosis and accepted it. And I kept saying, this isn't me. This isn't what's going on.
Do you mean that the diagnosis is not you, or do you mean that the medication made you feel not like you?
Both, actually.
Both,
There
yeah.
was something that I said, I feel off. Something is off, but it's not this. And I'm curious what your experience was getting diagnosed with ADHD and then trying medications, coming off medications, and then writing a book that became a phenomenon about what is actually ADHD.
Well, just to go back to your experience, one of the principles that I insist on is that no child should be forced on medication. No. Like, I don't care at what age, but no child should be made to believe that they're acceptable to their teachers or their parents only if they're medicated. That's the first. So that's just clear. Yeah. In terms of myself, I found the diagnosis rather a relief because all of a sudden I had kind of a map to myself. Now, I've understood since then that the diagnosis doesn't explain anything. It describes something, but it doesn't explain it. So it's a collection of traits, and there's any number of reasons why people can develop those traits. But you're not actually describing a disease entity. You're describing a collection of emotional and behavior patterns. You're describing them, but you're not explaining them because the explanation is rooted in life experience, as you and I know. Yeah. So that, Scott or the routine. Scott or Gabor have ADD. How do you know? Because they tune out a lot and they have poor impulse control. Well, why do they tune out? Poor impulse control because they have ADD. How do you know they have ADD? Because they tune out. It's just a circular tautological loop. Yeah. Why? The why has to do with people's lives. So, but nevertheless, I always wanted to write a book, for example, but I could never get until I knew something with my brain. I just had no map to do it, and so that became my first book. And I took medication while I was taking it, and it helped me concentrate. Yeah. When I took Ritalin, it made me depressed, but Dexedrine made me concentrate. It also made me speedy and aggressive, and that had impacts in my personal life and my professional life. But I appreciated the focus and the incentive that it gave me, and I couldn't have written that book without it. More recently, that was the book Scattered Minds, my first book. My most recent one, The Myth of Normal, is much more complex, much longer, it took much more research, took much longer to write. I took no medication, and in fact, when I tried to take medication, thinking I'll focus better, all it gave me was side effects. So my brain had changed in the meanwhile, is the whole point, which is one of the interesting facts about the human brain is that thank God, it can develop throughout the lifetime. But I welcome the diagnosis as kind of a map to myself. And, but I totally understand the sense that many people have when they take medication that it's not them and that it's not comfortable. I've had the same experience with Prozac, actually. I took fluoxetine in my 40s, and you know what? It actually helped. I calmed down. I was less impulsive. I was not as aggressive. That was fine. Later, when I tried it, I just said, this isn't me. I hated it. So it's interesting that even at different phases of one's life, the same medication can have different impacts. And I think it's very personal. And I think the person's sense of themselves needs to be really respected.
Yeah. Do you contribute it to the fact of the work that you have done since the first time you took these medications to now?
Oh, yeah. Like, for example, the more stressed you are, this is true for anybody, ADHD or not, the more difficulty they might have in concentrating, So and those stresses can be external, or they can be generated internally, or they can be relational. So that the more I work on myself and the more in my primary relationship, things become clear, the less stress there is, the less medication I need, so that it's a dynamic thing. And the more people work on themselves, lots of evidence, not that I'm any example of it, that meditation and body practices like yoga and so on, they help to calm the mind, you know. So, yeah, I think the work I did on myself, not that it's ever perfect or complete, but it made a huge difference in terms of how my mind functions. And it's interesting because I look at people have noted, for example, like Peter, a mutual friend, Peter, he told me a couple of years ago that my presentation style, when we presented together publicly, is totally different than it was when he first met me.
Yeah.
I was far more driven and speedy and I suppose less confident, you know? So yeah, be change. We can change.
And I've seen you change over the years too. Not that many years as Peter has seen you, but like there's a way in which it's also like there's a way you've gotten, I feel like, even more personal. Like it's like I feel more of the heart of you, like in the tendrils of your heart touching everyone. That's what to be in the room with you. It feels even more personal.
I'm glad to hear you say that. You know,
Yeah.
It's a nice thing to hear. I think I understand what you're saying. I mean, I was going to say modestly, no, but not bullshit. I mean, I do feel. It's not that I'm comparing myself to who I was, but when I'm in a room of people, I do feel the connection. I feel the connection myself. You know?
And I think this actually brings us to the heart of your work too, because I mean, you've described trauma and not as an event itself, but as a disconnection it causes, and you've brought that theme back in terms of chronic illness and ADHD, and so I'm wondering if we can really dive into that element of connection. Then is that curative?
First of all, let's just acknowledge that the concept is not entirely or even primarily original with me. You know, like Peter has said that. I think Peter has said that the biggest loss is the disconnection. You know, somebody said it, and certainly the spiritual teacher A.H. Alma says that the biggest calamity is not that you were loved or not loved by your parents, but that you lost the connection to your essence. You know, which is a good thing. Because if the problem was what happened to you and I in childhood, it's over, finished, done with, irreversible. But if the problem is the disconnection from ourselves, well, that connection is potentially available at any time. So that's a good thing. And I often, being a former English teacher, I really pay a lot of attention to language and the word recovery. Like when people recover, this is an obvious one. But what does it mean to recover something? It means to find it again. So what is it that people find? And specifically with addictions, when you talk to people and I don't prompt them, I just ask them, what did you find? They said, I found myself. You know, so that, yes, that's the healing, not to, just to complete it, not to mention that the word healing itself comes from a word for wholeness.
For those who are listening, and I think many people might have like an inkling or maybe an intellectual understanding or maybe not of this idea of like finding ourselves or coming back home to ourselves.
Yeah.
Where did we go?
We disconnected because we didn't go anywhere. We just hid from ourselves.
Yeah.
And we hid from, when do people hide? It's when there's fear.
Yeah.
So there must have been some powerful fear that caused you or I or anybody to hide from themselves. And why would we do that? Because we found that we were out in the open, we weren't accepted. We were perhaps punished or rejected or mocked or misunderstood. So it becomes safer to hide. Now a child can't pretend very well. So that the child, in order to hide, has to not just hide from the outside world, but from himself. Because it's hard, as a 4-year-old, it's really hard to pretend not to be angry if you're angry. But if you hide from your anger by repressing it, then you can do it. So that this unconscious desertion of oneself becomes a survival mechanism. And then the very idea of being yourself, or the very impulse to be yourself, is a threatening one. Because you learned early in childhood that it undermines your relationship with the people on whose your life depends. So we hide from ourselves. And then we develop these personalities of being nice or charming or being consumed with being attractive. So we get attention, not just for existing, which is our birthright, but for being smart or cute or pretty or whatever. And we develop these personalities, and then we confuse ourselves with our personalities. We think we are a personality. We're not our personality.
Well, especially if it's developed in response or compensation to trying to get something while simultaneously hiding.
Well, which much of it is, so that, if you didn't get the sense, for example, that you're important just for existing, which everybody needs to get. You're important. You matter. Well, if you didn't get that sense, then you'll work to make yourself important, and you'll be probably one of these people who go into the helping professions, because now you're going to be important. And it's not that there aren't good reasons, valid reasons to become a helper. I mean, it's just part of our nature to want to help other human beings. But often there's a hidden drive as well, where we're trying to be important in people's lives, or we're trying to be significant by making ourselves bigger than we are, and then we run for presidency of the United States, or if we didn't get the attention we needed just for existing, we might be consumed by becoming very attractive to attract the attention. If we weren't loved, we might become very charming. If we weren't liked, we might become very nice. But these are compensations, and we mistake them for who we are. We identify with them. And so that coming back to ourselves, and I'm sure you found this, is very often a process of disidentifying from who you thought you were. So that very question, when you say to somebody, who do you think you are? That's a really good question. Problem is, usually it's used as a judgment, as an attack. Who do you think you are? But if you actually ask somebody, well, who do you think you are? Who do you actually believe you are? That's a powerful question. Because we often believe we're somebody that we're not.
And it's interesting in the moments of, great rupture or breakups or other job losses, something that sort of takes us down a notch from being able to sustain that sense of identity, it kind of all falls apart if it doesn't have that underlying sense of who we are.
Yeah.
That we've built.
Well, so you know what? Did I ever tell you when I got fired from palliative care?
No. Why'd you get fired? Well, that's not the point, but or maybe it is.
Well, okay. So here's the deal. For 7 years, I was the medical coordinator of the palliative care unit at Vancouver Hospital, working with terminally ill people. Actually, I was on dexedrine at the time. A higher dose than I should have been on, actually. It made me very quick. I argued afterwards that I was fired for gross competence, because I was damn good at it,
Yeah.
But what happened was that I did things in my own way. I was never great at documenting what I did. I just did it because I believed in it. And actually it was quite effective.
Yeah.
The nurses really loved working with me. They said that working with me, though, was like working in the eye of a tornado, And, but other doctors, they questioned what I was doing. It's part of my personality, but highly enhanced on dexedrine, which made me more aggressive, to believe that when I'm being questioned, I'm being attacked, which is not the same thing. So when I perceive myself as being attacked, I get very aggressive. And that's what ended up getting me fired, And it's not, there was stuff on their side. They just didn't get things, and they weren't curious enough, and the usual rigidity in the medical system. But it needn't have ended up as me being fired had I not been so aggressive myself and so defensive. So I engineered my own firing. Now, my initial response was, I'm going to fight them to the death. I'm going to grind their faces into the dirt. I'm going to take them to court, And I could have made a good case, But just at that time, I got the contract to write Scattered Minds, my book on ADHD. Wow. And I remember saying to my wife one night, okay, I could fight this battle, or I could write a book, but I can't do both at the same time. What's more important to me? So I decided to write the book. And then over time, I learned that this loop in my head, that they don't get me, they don't see me, they're being unfair, is such an old song. Different words, but it's the same melody. And I just realized that they hadn't done this to me. What I had done to create the template for my firing and that I had so much to learn from this. But it took that job loss for me to disidentify from the way I was. And thank God I was able to learn from it. And then, as fate would have it, a month later, I got a phone call from the downtown east side in Vancouver. Would you be willing to work down here? And I had the time because I just lost my job, and that's what led me to the addiction work. That firing was the best thing that ever happened to me. One of the best things that ever happened to me. But I didn't see it that way at the time. It took a while for me to disidentify and then see what the truth really here is.
How did you discover the truth? Because I know now that that's also something you do in your own work with people, is like you kind of cut the shit, so to speak, and help people very quickly, reflectively and firmly, gently and compassionately, kind of get to the heart of the matter.
I have to say that that's been sort of a strength of mine over the years, is that ultimately I'm willing to cut through my own shit, see what the truth is. There's a Buddhist teacher, Bhikkhu Bodhi, who said that real security lies on the side of truth, and that's why Jesus talks about the truth liberating you, So the truth is important, and it may be painful, but it's important, it's essential. And so much of people's difficulties is because they're afraid they're afraid, there's something in them that's afraid of the truth. It shows up in personal life, in political life, and social life.
I want to take a moment to give a loud shout out to the Embody Lab, which is one of the most incredible resources for body-based and somatic therapies. This show is all about healing, and the Embody Lab does exactly that. Whether you're on your own journey of transformation and discovery, or enhancing your skill sets in your career as like a coach or a therapist, a body worker, or really any career where you are supporting other gently used humans, the Embody Lab is your place for deep, inspiring, and impactful workshops, certificates, masterclasses, and an incredible community of like-minded folks. I love the Embody Lab, and so do so many other people that call it a platform to come home to over and over again. The Embody Lab is giving my listeners an exclusive offer, a one-time 10% off code to enhance your embodied well-being. All you have to do is go to theembodylab.com and use the code GentlyUse10 at checkout. As we talk about like how the truth sets you free, there's the truth which we believe is true, and then there's the actual truth that we experience.
That's right.
And that's so hard to discern, like all the the ways when we de-identify, we're coming in often to the truth of the matter. But the truth we believe about ourselves is actually quite superficial and built on a lot of compensations of survival.
That's the whole point. That's what we have to disidentify from. Are you going to say how we do it?
Yeah, how do we get from the superficial truth that isn't actually truth?
Well, I mean, you must have had that experience. What was your experience of it?
I mean, I think I've had 2 or 3 major disidentifications in my life.
Yeah.
And all of them were so painful.
Yes.
And it's interesting. Like, I've always asked myself this question, and I still do, of like, is there a way to unburden ourselves with the survival mechanisms we've incorporated without pain? Like,
no,
fucking pain is this catalyst that also just rips us apart or rips the old apart.
Yeah, well, but the pain is not the problem.
No.
The problem is our fear of the pain, and the fear of the pain is rooted in childhood experience, because the child without support can't bear the pain. Now we're afraid of the pain. But as again, this teacher, A.H. Alma, says, only when compassion is present will people allow themselves to face the truth. So that if there's a compassionate presence that you can access either through other people or who knows, maybe through some spiritual awareness, then the pain is bearable, and it's temporary, by the way. It doesn't last forever.
It just feels that way.
Well, yes,
Yeah.
but the fear of the pain being permanent is actually a childhood state, because the child is beyond time. So when a child is experiencing something, for them that's permanent. If you say to a 2-year-old, dinner's in 5 minutes, all they're hearing is dinner is not now, and that lasts forever. So for them, that's unacceptable. And there's some part of us that's still rooted there, so that especially when it comes to pain, we believe that this is not permanent, and I go through those cycles, like sometimes, even now, if I find myself a bit stiff in the body, for example, I think, oh my God, old age, this is going to be like this for the rest of my life. And next day I feel better, but when you're in it, there's this fear of permanence.
Yeah. I think the fear of permanence, the pain itself, and then this radical unknown. Because the thing of like, before we come into a sense of how am I, who am I, is this deconstructed sense of almost liminal unknownness.
Mm-hmm.
And that itself is, I mean, if we have other people who've been in that space with us, then it's often more tolerable. But often I find that disidentification, where it's just blank,
Well, you know
is
what?
almost, yeah.
I know 3 people who've been through that. One of them is Dan Siegel. And Dan talks about his experience of being on a horse or in Mexico, and then the saddle flips and all of a sudden his head is being dragged along the ground. And, it could have been much worse, but clearly he's got a concussion, and he actually goes unconscious. He wakes up, he doesn't know his name, but it's all one. All of a sudden, Dan disappears, and it took him some time to come back. But he's never forgotten the sense of Katie Byron. Do you know that name, Byron Katie?
Byron Katie.
I was talking to her recently. She had this terrible suffering, I think, anorexia, depression. She literally collapses on the ground and then wakes up with no sense of being an individual. And it took a while for that self to be reconstituted, but she's never quite lost that state of being at one with everything.
Yeah.
And then my wife, she had this experience once, and she actually had it when we were having a terribly tough time in our marriage decades ago. And I was saying some very painful things at a retreat. And in the middle of the night, the pain was unbearable. It was like, she said, like the World War I was being waged in my chest, she says. And then she says, I can't bear this anymore. I'm just going to surrender to it. And all of a sudden, the world became nothing but energy, pure energy. And she saw the perfection in everything. So I've never had that experience myself, but people who have this ultimate loss of self in a very positive sense, the world is never the same. I've never had that experience. Have you?
Yeah. Several times. The first, when I had a pretty severe TIA, which might have been on the level of a stroke, it was unknown. Yeah, I was 28, and I was meditating, and I felt like something, like a wall between me and the rest of the world burst. And it was just like this sense of infiniteness. And I lost a lot of language skills and speech skills then, and had trouble for years organizing memory back into language.
Really?
So yeah, but that sensation, that feeling, I've had many more times, even in somatic meditations and things. I prefer it that way, or even psychedelic experiences. I prefer it that way versus like the de-identification, like the layers of yourself peeling off until it's just so raw that it just feels like it's hard to coordinate in the world.
Now, did you actually have a vascular event that first time?
Yeah.
Have you read that book, My Stroke of Luck?
Is it Jill's book?
I think, yeah.
Yeah. I remember her TED Talk too. Hers was much more severe than mine.
Yeah, hers was dire.
Pretty dire,
But
yeah.
it was quite a learning. Yeah. Anyway, I've never had that experience.
Well, what are you doing this weekend? You want to come over and we'll just, I don't know, figure it out?
Well, just the whole thing, though, hey, Scott, you can't figure it out. There's not something that you either open door or you don't. And I don't know how to open, like I don't, people talk about surrendering, but I don't think anybody does surrender. I think it either comes or it doesn't come.
I wonder, I mean, like, what do you mean? Like, have you ever given yourself in the same way you'd have with your wife, Ray? Did you ever say, I'm going to surrender into this in the same way she did?
No. And even if I said the words, I don't know if I know how to do it. Perhaps that's a cop out, or perhaps I got a thick skull, but you know what? I also trust that I'll have the experiences that I need to have. So if I need to have that, it'll happen. If I don't, it won't.
There's a lot of faith in that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I have some faith there.
Yeah.
Sometimes I wish that expansion, that oneness that you've experienced.
Yeah.
I'd just love to get a glimpse of it. Well, maybe I've had glimpses, but I'd love to have the full Monty,
Yeah.
But when I was totally naked and there's the world, But I don't know how to make it happen, and I don't want to stifle myself in a state of loss or bereavement about some experience that I haven't had.
I can appreciate that and honor. Like, it's not something to be forced. I don't know if I ever told you this. When I was, I had this experience. So I was extraordinarily dissociated as a kid. Like, would run into walls. That was part of the ADHD. It was like the scatteredness was. I mean, it was deep fragmentation from a lot of childhood trauma, a lot of violence, a lot of pretty scary environments, and I had this moment when I was probably 5 or 6 years old, and I was jumping off one couch onto another, and it was like time froze. And I could feel for the first time in the excitement of jumping, this sense of my body. And it was like all of a sudden I went from a flat piece of paper to a fully dimensional human. And it was just for a split second. And it was that split second for me that became the driver for all the work I've done since, like looking for that.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
Well, it brings up two memories for me when you hear you say that. One is in high school, our math teacher read us a story about flatland, and in flatland, people are two-dimensional. Like the creatures are two-dimensional, so there's points and there's lines, but there's no depth. And then one little character starts figuring out that there's a third dimension, and they all think he's strange, But he's the one that sees reality more clearly than anybody else. But the other is about time freezing. And I was in a car accident once when somebody came out from behind a stop sign and hit my car very hard on the back trunk, fortunately. Because if it had been closer to where the driver's seat was, I might not have been so lucky. But as a result, my car spun around 360 degrees in the next lane, where there's an oncoming car coming towards me. And it was beautiful. Time slowed. It took 2 seconds, but it seemed like there was no time. And it was slow motion. I was just so aware of everything. And God, I wish I could have that state all the time. Where the time, and I'm just reading, I was telling you, I was reading this biography of Einstein. And of course, Einstein, not that I even understand what the heck he was talking about, but he really expanded or understood or subverted our understanding of time.
Yeah.
because we tend to think of time as linear, but he actually said it's related to space and velocity, and it's relative, you know. So even when you talk about time freezing, and for me, when everything is in slow motion, there's another dimension.
I might even be quoting you as I say this, but trauma is the thief of time.
No, I wish I could claim it, but I can't.
Oh well, I'll just by
Yeah,
you.
I'll take it.
Take it. Maybe I made it up.
Yeah,
But
that was pretty smart to say that, wasn't it?
Yeah. Maybe I said it and you took it from me and I took it back. Who knows?
Yeah.
But as it collapses the past and the present and the future,
yeah,
and it also gives us this idea of being like, we aren't with time, we aren't having flexibility of time. Like that moment of like life slowing down in that car was giving you an embodied sense of the flexibility of time as Einstein's talking about it.
Right.
And we lose that flexibility. We lose the sense that life can speed up or slow down, which is actually what happens with more cortisol.
Yeah.
When there's a intensification of cortisol, it's actually time speeds up typically, or massively slows down depending on our chemistry of it. But yeah, I appreciate, and do you know Laban movement analysis?
No.
There's actually quite a few different studies of time, like how we embody and explore time, and from a movement analysis perspective, or different ways of analyzing people. And when we used to do couples work, I wouldn't work with a couple if they had no overlap of their signatures of time.
What does that mean?
So if their own tempo, their speed, their own rhythm, like we all have our own natural rhythm. You have your rhythm, I have my rhythm. And one of the ways in which I think why I love spending time with you is because it's actually easy to synchronize and have that overlap of our timing, like the way we think, the speed at which we do it, and the ways we draw things together quite quickly.
Yeah.
But with couples, I've seen where it's like they have no relationship through space, and there's no overlap of their rhythms of being in the world. And I would just say, sorry, I won't work with you. I don't have a lot of hope in this regard. That was when I was younger.
By the way, is that their limitation or yours?
It was more of like, I tried in the beginning, and it was this thing that if there was a stubbornness, it's like, in the Venn diagram where there's overlap, there's relationality.
Yeah.
And if there's no possibility for relationality through time, then I spent years going, this is just not, I've seen it enough, it's not going to work.
Right.
And it's an abstract idea, but it's actually something like, if I'm always going really fast and you're going slow and we can't find any medium ground to catch up to each other. I mean, that's more of an extreme example, but.
Well, you know what? And that's been a tension in my own marriage, because we do have somewhat different rhythms. We have a lot of commonality, thank God, but that time thing, when I pack my schedule full of activities, it's my wife who gets stressed, and I get up in the morning, and I woke up at 5:30 this morning, and should I go back to sleep? No, I went for a swim instead, and so I tend to be much more active that way. She wants to take things more slowly, and actually negotiating the relationship is actually compromising on that one,
Yeah.
And actually, is it compromising? It's not good for me to work that hard either, so it's more like, but we are different that way. And I'm just acknowledging your point. It's been a source of tension.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you feel like that's something in the compromise, you're expanding your sense of time, like finding that flexibility of time?
There's certainly more space and expansion within myself.
Yeah.
It's rather than it's not I'm giving up something and therefore I'm empty. There's actually more spaciousness.
Yeah, it's more of a acquisition or expansion of your own capacity. And again, I think one way we could look at it is, I think that's a healing of trauma. Like within that, and that's a symptom of healing of trauma, is that expansion of time.
Yeah, well, I think that's true. Again, Einstein when he was 21, he was saying that he was giving advice to a friend, and he said, you can never fill that emptiness or find yourself through somebody else. It's got to be within. So that expansion is a healing of trauma.
It's interesting coming from a person, not you necessarily, but Einstein, who really never felt like he belonged.
Yeah, he said that wherever he was and whatever group he belonged to, he was a bit of an outsider. Mm. And I think it's a good thing to be, because you get to see things. Mm. When you're inside something, totally inside it, it's hard to see the overall patterns. You know what? You know this. You know this, but I mean, when he came up with, in 1905, he wrote 4 seminal papers on physics. But you know what his job was at the time? He wasn't an academic. He was working at the patent office in Switzerland, approving or rejecting people's submissions for patents. And he wrote his 4 seminal papers in 1905. For another 4 years, he didn't get an academic position. He couldn't even get a high school teaching job, even though his papers were recognized. So it was another 4 years before he actually became Dr. Einstein, and was accepted academically. Talk about being an outsider.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is that how you feel, or how you've been able to link and create all of these ways of understanding, again, like ADHD, chronic illness, addiction, in ways that really bring it to the heart of the matter?
You see, it's all the same message. When you actually look at everything I've talked about, it's just one message. And what's the message? It's all one. That's the message, and you can't separate people from their experience, and you can't separate the mind from the body. I mean, that's all there is to it. It's very straightforward. I mean, from my point of view, that's not what's controversial. What's controversial is anybody trying to prove that mind and body are separable. I mean, it's ridiculous that I or anybody else has to prove that mind and body are inseparable. That's ridiculous. What really should be happening is people should be proving that they're not. It's like try and prove the existence of love. Mm. Well, you can't prove it in a laboratory. There's nothing you can do in a laboratory to prove that there's love, but try and live without it. So why is this stuff even controversial? So what I'm saying is, it's not me, and people think when I say me, I mean generically. I'm not unique, but it's not people that see the unity of things that should be able to that should have to prove what we're talking about. Let those who believe in the non-unity of things, let them prove that things are not one. Let somebody show me that mind and body are separable. Why should I have to prove that they're, it's backwards is what I'm saying. Yeah. They should get the controversy award. The people who argue otherwise or don't see it, they should get the award for controversy.
So as you talk about like the sort of heart, the root of all of your work, and addiction, ADHD, chronic illness, it really comes back to recognizing the ways in which we have been so disconnected from each other, ourselves, our sense of truth. How do you support people to find themselves back to that connection, if it's a chronic condition of disconnection in our culture, or chronic condition of the way that science even teaches it still?
Well, what I've learned is don't look for yourself. Just notice where you're not being yourself. Because there's a simple trick here. Yeah. When you notice that you're not being yourself, who's noticing? Well, the person who's noticing is yourself. Otherwise, you wouldn't notice. Yeah. If you really were who you thought you were, you wouldn't notice that you're not being yourself. So it's more noticing and then being curious about it. Like, okay, what was the fear here? What was going on here? And it's very simple that way. It's like my little exercise of where do you not say no? And, it doesn't know that you want to say, you don't say it. Well, okay, notice that you didn't say no when you felt like it, and then be curious about it. Well, who's the one that noticed, and who's the one that's curious? So it's not that complicated conceptually.
And yet there are so many things that just get in the way or protect us, quote unquote, protect us from unraveling that identity and that protection.
Yeah. Well, there are many ways. And again, there has to be that willingness to be curious.
Just as one of the ways to sort of wrap up, how do you encourage curiosity? Because curiosity is, I think, an actual state, an embodied state, this hunger for discovery. And we can do it intellectually, or we can come into like the felt experience of curiosity.
I was just looking around here because I was looking for my cell phone, but I can't find it right now. And the reason I was looking for my cell phone is because on my cell phone, there's a quote by Peter Levine where he talks about curiosity being an innate quality of human beings. And of course, you see that in children. I mean, they're so curious. 2, 3, they discover the whole world. And that gets dulled by social expectation and experience. But it never leaves us. It never leaves us, that curiosity, and again, if people experience some compassion for themselves, so if they say, why am I doing this? And again, it depends how they're asking it. This is where compassion comes in again. I think compassion and curiosity are linked together. So if you say to yourself, why am I doing this? There's no curiosity there. There's a judgment. But if you say, why am I doing this? I mean, in some ways I know better, but I'm still doing it. I wonder why I'm doing it. Well, that's compassion there, because you really just want to know. You're not trying to judge. So I think that's why the therapeutic method that I've helped to develop is called compassionate inquiry. There has to be an inquiry there, which implies curiosity, but the compassion has to come first, whether for others or for yourself.
Just even in the difference of your tone, like I was thinking about something, a certain rumination trap I've been on lately, and I'm like, why do I keep doing this? Yeah. And when you shifted your tone to like, and why am I in this?
Yeah. And
it's like almost like the Wizard of Oz, like the curtain unveils to see this little kid behind the curtain.
Well, a little guy. Yeah.
Little guy. Yeah. Little guy, little me.
Yeah.
Sort of driving the car a little bit.
And what's interesting is that when he stops being the great and powerful Wizard of Oz, he becomes this little guy behind the curtain. He reveals all his wisdom. That's when he reveals all his wisdom.
Yeah.
And he gives just the right advice to everybody.
That's so true. And oof, that hits deep. Yeah. That's where the true healing and wisdom comes from, is when we can pull the curtain back.
Yeah.
And be with the parts of ourselves that have been so cloaked and protected. And
yeah. When you think of that metaphor of that guy in the movie, what is this big wizard of, it's an act.
Yeah.
Because he's afraid of his littleness, Because clearly, well, not to psychoanalyze too much, but who does that? Somebody who was hurt in their littleness.
Yeah.
So the grandiosity is a compensation.
Yeah.
And grandiosity means also disconnection from your true self and the loss of wisdom.
It's amazing how in the repairing of the scatteredness, like coming back into the wholeness, that, not only do some of the symptoms of things like ADHD and chronic illness fade away, as both of us have personally experienced, but also there's a return of this drive, this wisdom that is really truly innate within us, that becomes a guiding force.
Yeah.
Well, my friend, thank you so much for being on the Gently Used Human. And we will put all your books and all your links in the show notes, and make sure that everyone gets a chance to connect with you more as well. And
thank you. That went by really quickly.
I know. Well, we could sit here and chat for hours as we usually do.
As we tend to do, yeah.
As we tend to do.
Yes. Thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure.
Thank you, my friend. And to all of our gently used humans out there, we love you. Thank you for listening to the Gently Used Human podcast with Dr. Scott Lyons and friends. Visit gentlyused.com for fun extras. And don't forget to spill the tea and gossip about the show with all your friends and frenemies. And show some love by giving us 5 stars and leaving a review in your favorite apps. This helps us connect with all the other gently used humans out there. Oh, and by the way, you look fierce today.